Hi there, my name's Dorothy Greer with Little Dot Designs and Creations, and today is 3/19/24. It's been a very busy day, and it's like 10:30 at night. So I probably look terrible and the lighting's terrible, but that's okay. Um, and I don't make videos just to be making videos. If I don't have a reason, I usually don't make them, but I've been a lifelong quilter, and lately a lot of people have called on me to either repair or finish a vintage quilt that maybe their family members had started or something like that, or maybe they had started themselves. So when I do that, I try to kind of video the process for the family so that they can see what went on and how I did it. This quilt, however, just kind of jumped out and grabbed me. It doesn't belong to anybody. I actually got this in a thrift store. It's a very old quilt, and I'm going to show it to you. I know you can't see it right now, it's off the screen, but I'm going to turn the screen down so you can see it. But I got this in a thrift store. I think it was in Wytheville, Virginia. I go to 2 or 3 different towns, but this one just stuck out to me all across the room, and I went over to it, and there it was. It had not been quilted. It was just a top. And looking at the fabric, I could tell it was very old. And looked at the price tag, which I've got that tag, I'll show you. It was $5.99. $5.99. So I bought it and brought it home to finish it up and try to do the best I can, as I think the person who pieced it would have done. And so I'm going to quit right here and turn my camera around so that you can see my table and see the quilt. And I'm just going to kind of tell you the process I'm doing with it. And maybe over the course of a few days, I'll tune back in and show you how the progress is going, and then we'll see the finished project. And this quilt will actually probably be for sale. I have a couple of vendor booths, and I will probably put it in there for sale, or maybe online, I'm not sure. But as we go on and we see more what kind of shape it's in, I'll let you know where it will be. So we're going to take a look at the quilt now. Okay, now hopefully you can see the quilt spread out here on my little table and what I'm doing to it. I would estimate this quilt is at least from the 1950s, if not the 1940s, just going by the fabric that's in here. And the first thing that I noticed was how all of the little squares have been just pieced. Sometimes 3 and 4 pieces into these little like 4-inch squares. I don't have a real good example right here, but right here's one's pieced. Here was one piece. Right here is one little bitty corner that was pieced on. So they've made do. It looks like there's been probably some men's shirts, maybe some sheets, some other clothing, and maybe even some feed sacks and that kind of thing. So it's just a hodgepodge of fabrics, but whoever pieced this did the very best they could with what they had. It is kind of puckered, but they did try to put it in a design. And if you look at the stitches on the back, I don't know, this is not close enough for you to see, but on the back of the quilt, I can tell that this has been done on a vintage sewing machine. If you've ever used a vintage machine, and especially a treadle, they have very distinctive looking stitches. They're very highly defined, and that's what this looks like. So the sewing on it's really actually good. Most of those machines are very good machines. Right here I can see even that this black square has had a corner pieced right in the middle of it. So that is all good. There are a few repairs needed, and how I usually start this process, I don't wash it. Occasionally, depending on the condition of the quilt when I get done, I might maybe hand wash it, or just very gently wash it, and then usually recommend that the new owner not wash it unless absolutely necessary. So the first thing I do is I iron it as best I can, and you can see there's still lots of puckers. That's okay. Person did the best they could with what they had. Then I spread it out on my table, and I go over it inch by inch. I'm usually using my lint roller and getting off as many stray threads as I can, and that usually helps me identify some little threads that are sticking out, maybe that I need to snip off. And also, if there's any tears, I usually find those that way. And I have found in this quilt a few, not very many. Somebody did take their time in doing the piecing they did, but I did find even where apparently they found, after they pieced it together, some places that need to be mended, and right here was one of them. Two squares come together right here, and it's pulled apart. But if I turn it over and look on the back, they have took a patch and put it back there and started to stitch it down. Apparently didn't finish it, or maybe forgot where it was at and couldn't find it. So I'm going to leave that little patch that they had, and I'm going to try to stitch that down. Because they did some repairs. There's some down here in the corner where they did the same thing. On the back of the quilt, they put a little patch of fabric where they could. It looks like they used the same color as the block. And then they just took their sewing machine and stitched back and forth across that little patch. And that tells me, too, this was probably a vintage machine and only did straight stitch, because that's all it is. So I think if it had had some zigzags in there, that would have helped hold it down a little bit better. So I'm going to go through the entire quilt and identify anything that needs to be repaired before I start quilting it. Sorry, I'm trying to stretch it back out. So usually, also before I start quilting it, depending on the design, I'll look at my edges. The edges are usually, if there's something ragged about a quilt, it's going to be these edges. And sometimes they'll be pulled apart. This one, surprisingly, is not. Because I think they have done a good job of making sure their edges are secure. So that has not raveled out at all. Maybe it had been put up well. And then just got, maybe as part of an estate or something, got turned into the thrift shop. So anyway, what I've done with this one, if this was very, very straight, I would just go with it. I would probably put a line of straight stitches down through there just to stabilize it. But what I did was that, since I looked at their pattern, and I thought what made the most sense to go down this side as a border would be another black strip. So I just got out some fabric that matched this as close as I could match it, and I cut some strips about the same size as they did, and I'm going to sew this around the whole outside of the quilt. That will give it a border to help stabilize the seams, and something to fasten to while I'm quilting. And I think it'll look okay with the pattern. So that's my plan. And I suppose the next time I see you, I will at least have the little repairs made. I'll have the borders on, and I'll probably have it on my machine to quilt. And this one is going to be, I guess, what I would call a vintage meets modern, because most of the time, and if it's belonged to someone and they requested it, I would hand quilt this whole thing. I probably don't have to tell you how many hours that would take. So even though I don't really want to, I'm going to put this on my long arm machine, and I'm going to long arm quilt it. I'll have to make a backing too, and I'll try to use a fabric that kind of matches or is from that era. But anyway, so hopefully the next time you see this, it'll be on the machine, ready to quilt. So I'm back a little bit earlier than I think I told you I would be. I believe I told you that I would be back whenever this quilt was ready to go on the frame. And I decided I left out one important step, was the backing for the quilt. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about that and how it turned out. And plans don't always go as you think they will, and I just let you know where that went. So one project just kind of morphed into another one. But anyway, this was the quilt, the vintage quilt that I was working on. And I got the top done. I put the black border around the outside to match what was inside. And I made some repairs throughout the quilt that just needed to be done. So that was done. It was ready for a backing so that I could put it on my frame and quilt it. So what I thought was, well, one, if you look at this fabric, and I believe it's probably from, maybe some of it's from probably the 50s. It looks like a lot of men's shirts have been cut up and some different things like that. So I have some vintage fabric, and I thought I would use that to make the backing, just a pieced random scrap backing. That was my initial plan. Well, a lot of that fabric I didn't have right here at this location. I had it somewhere else where I do some teaching. So I got in a hurry. I didn't want to wait to go get that fabric, so I just thought, okay, I would just use what I had on hand. And so I started piecing a scrappy back for this quilt, because I thought that's what this person would have done. They would have used whatever they had. So I had some orphan blocks. If you don't know what that is, it's just blocks that were made for other quilts and just didn't make it into that quilt for one reason or the other, and were stuck back in a box. So I pulled all those out, and I random pieces that had been cut off of other quilts after I quilted them off the sides, and just some strips and all kinds of different things, and thought, well, I'll just sew all this together and make a big backing, which I did. And then I didn't like it. Well, I mean, I liked it, but not for that quilt, because it just didn't scream vintage to me. This is what it is, and I don't know if I can hold this up so that you can see it, but maybe you can see that there are some actual quilt blocks in there, a lot of strips. This thing is a monstrosity. Now that I've worked it up, it's a king size. It will be a king size, but so I abandoned this as the backing to that quilt, because I thought this is just not the vibe I want for that vintage quilt. So I didn't want to abandon this though. And if you've ever tried to do just a random pieced backing or quilt, I think they're harder to do than working with an actual pattern, because it just kind of evolves as you go. You sew something together, and then you find something to match that and sew it together, and you just don't know where it's going to go in the end. So this thing just turned out to be a huge monstrosity. It's got enormous pieces. It's got little bitty tiny pieces, curved pieces, everything you can think of. The colors they're just random everything. So I didn't want to abandon that. Another thing, when you do a quilt like this, it has so many seams in it where you've just pieced random things together that makes a really heavy quilt top too. So I didn't want that heaviness on the back of that vintage quilt, which is kind of fragile. So this is another project for another day right here. So I went ahead, I finished piecing up things. I did it while I was in the mood, while I was in the zone, is what I call it, because if I'd laid this down and went back to it in a few weeks, I would have been out of that zone and not know where to start. So this will be one that I lay back. I'll probably use a solid backing on it and make a scrap quilt out of. So I learned my lesson. I decided, yes, I should have just went and got my vintage fabric, which I did. I didn't quite have enough to finish it out in all the vintage pieces, So the other pieces that I chose, I tried to at least pick something that had a vintage vibe to it, like a floral or something like that, or something that looked like a man's shirt. But this is a simple quilt top, a simple backing, and so I will do just some simple quilting as well. So again, the next time I see you, I will probably have this on the frame, or I might even show you just a little bit of how the process goes to get it on there, because honestly, sometimes it takes me longer to get one on there than it does to actually quilt it. It'll take me at least an hour to put this whole thing on there the way I want it, and sometimes I'll take it off and start over. So I think that's an important part, to get on your frame right, and then the rest of the quilting will go much easier. Okay, I'll see you in the next step. Okay, so I told you I'd let you see this thing as I put it on the frame. This is the backing that I'd pieced. You can really see, looking at it here, how pieced it is, but that's kind of the way they did them in the old days. And I still do several of them that way, so you can see all those seams. And you can tell this, because this is a backing, it looks like it's on upside down. But the part that will be facing out is back here, because then we're going to have a layer of batting, and then the top will go on here. The top will be facing up, so it's going to be on here like a sandwich. And when I go to put the top on, I might show you a little more how I actually go about clamping on here. But you can see my machine. I've got a big machine. This is 12 foot. And as I roll this bar, it rolls the fabric up on there. I'll be doing that with the batting and the top also. So this is a long process. It takes me at least an hour to get one on here and get it on good and straight, because you don't want any puckers or anything going on in there. So at some point I might do a little video and show you how I load a whole quilt. But you know, there's lots of videos out there on that anyway. But I'm just... Okay, I told you I'd show you a little bit more about putting this thing on the frame. So we earlier had the backing on this bar, and it's rolled up under there, but now we have the batting rolled up on top of that. And this is polyester high loft batting, which is a thicker batting, mainly because that's all I have right at the moment, and I don't live in a place where I can just run right out to the store and get something new. So next will be the top, which I have rolled up on this bar right here, and it will just be pulled up over that batting and tacked down. So we're going to have the top, the batting, and then the backing. And I will get this basted down and start quilting, and somewhere along the way I'll show you another little snippet of it being quilted. We will go from there. Okay, I said I would let you see me do a little bit of the quilting on this quilt, so I'm going to do a little bit here, and I'll zoom in a minute and you can see up close. But a lot of people think I have a machine and I just set the computer and stand back and let it do its thing, but that's not the way it is, really. I do have to drive this thing, so the quilt's definitely not perfect, and it's got lines that are not even, and maybe some puckers and who knows what else. But I'm going to show you how this process goes, and then I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I'm using a ruler for this part. And I'm just trying to go around each of those blocks and put a little X in it, because I wanted to keep it simple for this quilt. And then just a little bit of a swirly line in the black. And that's it. So you can get really detailed with these quilting designs, but I just don't think that would be appropriate for this quilt. sometimes I'll backtrack. That's what I did right there. If I don't think it'll show very much, but if I kind of work myself into a corner, I'll break the thread and start in another spot, which I will have to do here in just a minute. Okay, I'm at one of those spots, and there's several ways to stop, but right now I'm going to use the knot function on here. When I do this, it's going to tie a knot, and I can just get my thread out of there and cut it. If I can find my scissors. Okay. Okay, so I'm making sure each block has an X, and it doesn't. I've got to do one here and one here, and I've got a line down through here. So when I do that, this block is done, and I'll move over to this one, and I will zoom in closer. You can see it better on this plain fabric. Okay, I just went back and looked at that clip I just did, and realized you really couldn't see anything but my back doing that quilting. So I've tried to zoom in on this block so you can see a little bit better, but this is a block. It's got some solid so you can see it better, but right here is one of those places that I had to repair, and there's some blocks in here that have been pieced, so it's typical for the quilt. So I'm just going to start here in this corner and do a few lines, and maybe you can actually see what's going on this time, I hope. Again, I'm going to use my ruler. When I'm doing the swirly stuff out in this black, I don't use a ruler for that. It's just kind of freehand. And sometimes I just practice and try to make up a design, depending on what I'm working on. I would love to be able to do all my quilts by hand. That's what I really love to do on a frame. But if you need to make a lot of quilts, it's just not feasible now, because it will take sometimes months to do one hand quilting. That's the way I used to do all of mine. Felt like I was cheating if I used the machine. And I know some people still feel that way. So hopefully this just gives you an idea how this works. I know there's a million videos out there on YouTube that you can see. It's just my version. And there will be places in this quilt that actually looks like there's a pucker and there's not, like right here. It's because there's a seam there and I'm just sewing over it. And right here will be one. It's not a pucker, but it might look like one. And then there might be a place or two that I really get a pucker. So that's okay too. Okay, the quilting process is over. And I've got it off of the frame, and here it is. It turned out pretty good. So once I got it off the frame, I made sure all the edges were nice and smooth and the corners were squared off and everything, and we've got it ready for binding. So I make my own binding, and I thought since I did my edges in black, I would do the binding in red to match those little contrasting squares there. So I've got my binding cut out and ready to go on. So I will sew that on. And then I'll be making a label to put on the quilt that just tells, you know, the date that, approximate date I got the quilt, when I quilted it, and just a little bit about it. And I'll attach that to the back of the quilt. And it'll be done and ready to go on to its new owner. So I've got a plan for that. I've got somebody in mind for this quilt, but I will share that at the end. And I will the next time I see you, it should be complete and ready to go. I'm back with a quick update on this quilt. It is done. I've got the binding around the edge, and I did that in red to match the little squares. And I've also put a tag on the back of it telling a little bit about the quilt, and I'll read that to you in just a minute. But I told you that I had someone in mind for the quilt, and I have contacted her. She's not seen it yet, but I'm sure she's going to take it. But I won't mention her name until it's in her possession. And I'm hoping when I take this will probably be our last video, but I'm hoping when I deliver this to her that she'll let me take her picture with it, and I'll add that at the end of the video. But I just put I think I told you that I'm also a real estate agent. So this is a person that I've met and I've worked with for a little bit over a year, and just really connected with her well, her and her husband. And I'm in Virginia, she's in North Carolina, and so she doesn't get to come up here very often, but hopefully the next time she comes I'll be able to take this to her and deliver it to her, and then take a picture with it. But she is really into historical homes, and she also has a background in quilting with her grandmother. So I thought she would appreciate this quilt. And then she just bought a historical home that she could put it in. So on the tag I put, this vintage quilt top was rescued from a thrift store in 2023 in Withville, Virginia. In 2024, it was repaired and quilted by Dorothy Greer in Sugar Grove, Virginia. It was gifted to, and I put her name, in 2024 at her newly purchased home, and I put the town that it's in, because of her appreciation of quilts and historical items. So I'm really pleased with how this turned out, and I think she'll love it and give it a home. And I just couldn't think of anybody I would trust with it more than her. So that's my plan, and thank you for watching along this little journey, and I will update with a picture at the end.